Not in film and video, and if you did something in storytelling, because a lot of people have something prior to, if you have something
Hmm.
to that, as well,
Yeah.
to get your start.
In terms of my start, I had a somewhat non-traditional, although I'm sure a lot of people have gotten into film from various disciplines and they might not have started out as a film student. I, for one, did not start out studying film. So I grew up in India, and at the time that I was in college, which was in the mid to late 80s, there was only one film school in the entire country, and you had to get into it right after getting out of high school. So it was a 5 year, it was like a more traditional, old style film school. And I I was doing sociology in college, and I did my undergraduate and graduate work in sociology. And at the time that I was doing my grad school, I took a class in semiotics with one of an amazing intellectual and professor who is now teaching at Johns Hopkins, and she introduced me to my first cinema studies text and to the idea that cinema was something worth studying as opposed to simply because if you grew up in India, for most people in India, cinema meant the Mumbai film industry, which is known as its somewhat derisive term, Bollywood. Um, and the idea that filmmaking was an enterprise that you could not just learn the craft, but also study as a social text or as a text about as a cultural text. That excited me a lot. So my transition took place after grad school when I was looking for film programs, and I came to the US to study for the first time in my life to do a grad program in communication. It took 2 degrees. I had an MS, and an MFA in television production, after which I started looking at how I could find a place in this world of, of making, of creative work. And academia presented a nice option because I had spent all this time in academia. I had spent a lot of time working with students as a TA, and I had also developed an interest in a certain type of film that I wanted to do, which was documentary work, but documentary work involving working closely with communities and figuring out from their cultural texts, from their world, what could be the material for representation, as opposed to assuming that there was a universal way of telling a story, a universal language of cinema. So those were some of the issues that were deeply they came from some of my sociological studies, but the interest in working in images, the interest in having some way of making change and impact through the stories were some of the big questions that I came out with. And it took a while. I started out doing some commission work for a local nonprofit. And then I would say the big transition point which I credit both with my filmmaking, with the biggest filmmaking project that I got in my early start, but also becoming activated as a South Asian into the politics of race and identity. They both happened simultaneously. So there was I had founded with another South Asian friend of mine a society for a South Asian Film and Video Association, because we saw that there was a lack of community amongst many people from in the diaspora. And we had a website. We got a lot of people to kind of write in, and we were developing that as a resource for the community. And somebody saw that website, somebody who was in the activism, progressive activism kind of community, and called me asking if I would want to be a consultant on a documentary project that she was developing at the time about bias crime, about hate crimes against South Asians. And so we had a very long conversation, about half an hour, 40-minute long conversation. And when I hung up, it occurred to me that I wasn't going to be a consultant on this. I wanted to do this. So I threw my hat in, I wrote the proposal, I sent it in, and I got picked. At the time, my ex-wife and we used to work together on projects, and so we would always pitch as a duo. And that project really sort of was a baptism by fire in the world of field production, in the world of, it was a national spread. We traveled to 4 cities, DC, Chicago, LA, and of course within New York. And what was really transformative about that project is it was about hate crimes. We were doing a history of bias crimes and hate crimes against South Asians, and we had a rough cut ready in October of 2000, August of 2001. And a month later, September 11th happened. And there was a rash of attacks against people of South Asian descent, whether it was a Sikh, whether it was somebody brown who had a beard like me, whether it was actually, it didn't matter whether you were a Muslim or you just had to look like somebody who was one of the 19 hijackers whose photos were being printed. And that really made me, in terms of filmmaking, when you have to transform the film midstream and its agenda shifts by real world events that are happening, to me that was really powerful. And I'll never forget how that shaped me as a filmmaker, both in terms of how I responded as a South Asian who was getting activated into the identity politics of South Asian diaspora, but also as a filmmaker who had to learn that the definition of film resonates with what is happening in the contemporary ferment in the moment, and how you have to respond to that. And that has always remained with me.
Wow, what an amazing story. That's incredible. Like the timing of that, obviously the things you can't predict, but having something like that ready right at that moment.
Yeah, yeah. No, I remember coming. I used to. I was teaching in New Haven, Connecticut at the time, and I remember coming down to Queens, to Richmond Hill, which is one of the neighborhoods which is populated by a lot of people from the Sikh community, and they have a temple, a Sikh temple, which is called a Gurdwara. And there's this old, 70, 75-year-old Sikh gentleman with a white flowing beard. I mean, the very image of a saint, right? We went to interview him, and that story was just so powerful that it sort of ripped the mask off of the civility that I thought that American society was all about, rule of law, that when it came to when the chips were down, how would people react? And he was coming from the Gurudwara after a prayer meeting, and these guys jumped out of a pickup truck, and they had baseball bats, and what they did was they had nails studded into the baseball bats that they were going around picking on people, and he happened to be the unlucky victim that day. So he crawled home half bloodied. His daughter-in-law helped him, into, and that story was like happened just a few weeks before we went and interviewed him. That was very powerful. That I really, I think I credit that experience of listening to these stories, developing a way of becoming a recorder, a witness to them. That was very transformative for me.
Yeah. And amplifying them to the
Yeah,
right ears and eyes. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's hard to transition from the meaning and the impact to back to the industry, but I do want to go back to
sure.
the paid or serious job, because part of the goal of this book is to help people find their entry points. And what was your entry point, and what do you consider your first paid or serious job? Was that it? Because you mentioned you had some commission jobs.
Yeah, yeah. So this was the project. So I realized that um, I had no track record of doing a project of that scope, of handling a subject that involved such a massive number of people and the impact on the community and so on. Um, so I was learning what budgeting meant, and very quickly. Because the funders, they had a limited pot of money, and everything had to be done within that. And we said yes, because I was so hungry to work on this project. I wanted to do it because it seemed exactly the kind of thing, the kind of story that I would want to tell. It had the elements of the community that I had some knowledge of, and I would want to know more. So that would be the first big project that I I got. And, of course, it meant, it was from conception to delivery. So it was not one piece of it. I understood that very well, that I would be responsible, or rather we would be responsible for the entire project. Yeah.
Wow. Do you mind sharing, or can you share the name of the organization?
Sure, sure. So at that time, this organization was getting founded. It was called SAALT, SALT. So it was South Asian Americans Leaders of Tomorrow. Um, I don't know if they're still around. I believe they are, because this film was very formative in that organization's coming into the center of South Asian politics at that time. Because as you can imagine, because we had the ability to respond to the 9/11 events, we had the film ready by November of that year. And we were screening all throughout the country, from, the Southern Poverty Law Center to Chicago to LA, at the Smithsonian, at NYU, wherever there was a need for stories to respond to the moment. So I think that was part of the organization's mandate, to bring the South Asian community together, and be able to respond to threats of racial violence and so on. And fortunately or unfortunately, we were part of that in the moment, right?
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So picking up on the paid job and getting this like starting point, we all tell students you've got to network, you've got to build a reel, you've got to build your skills, like, knowing that somewhere it's kind of like throwing stuff against the wall, something's going to work.
Yeah.
For you, do you feel like there was one particular thing that really helped you advance? Was it having these specific, like kind of high profile or really responsive documentaries, or was it something else?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's very true that, um, if you do work that impacts communities, and as of course there is the artistic satisfaction part, we are all doing a combination of, when you work in documentary, you're not just an artist, you are a public intellectual or public artist who's sharing something of values, entering into a discourse. Uh, Through that project, my work and the ability for producing something like that became known in the community. And it's interesting, because I got a call a few years down after that film was finished, from somebody in New Jersey who used to head a mental health organization called NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And she had reached out to people that she knew in the South Asian network, and the executive producer of the hate crimes piece happened to be one of those people she reached out to. She immediately mentioned my name to her. So you can see that, of course, in the diaspora, you're not talking about a very, very large number of people, but there are a few filmmakers. And then once you have proven that you can commit to a project and you can see it through, and you're not just doing it because you're looking for it as a commission piece, that your involvement in the project far exceeds the remit. And that led to two other projects with NAMI. So I would say, I think one doesn't commit to a project knowing that that's a networking opportunity, but what one does within that, what was done with that first opportunity, for instance, marks the way forward to the network that you are not even aware that it's going to be created because of that. Absolutely. I think I tell students all the time that whether it's a PA job, whether you're doing a 1 day gig for somebody, you don't go in looking to just saying, how much money am I going to make? Because if that's the outlook, then you're not going to get the impact, because you're doing it because you can't wait to get paid for it. So yeah, I know that there's a lot of exploitation in our industry. There are a lot of underpaid gigs. There's a lot of uncertainty around freelancing and so on. But it's also true that people remember uh, who you worked with and how well you worked or how committed you were. And I think those things do matter, especially when you're producing a project. Your commitment to seeing it through, and how badly you wanted to get it finished, or how badly you want to extend it. So we had a budget that we started out with the hate crimes piece, but as it grew in momentum and its significance, we wanted to do more things. And so we were able to go out, and the executive producer at the time was able to go out and get more funding. And the fact that we committed ourselves to expanding the scope of the project was not lost on her. That we weren't just like, okay, that's what you asked us to do. We're going to do that. And yeah, the stuff that's happening, yeah, we're not really prepared for that. But to be able to respond to that was, I think, important. I'd say, in short, yes, uh, the way that you approach a project defines to a large extent how people connected to that project will remember you, and to the extent that they will pass it on to the next person who comes looking. Yeah.